Yes, sir. It is.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. We'll call to order the meeting of the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to staff for providing us with the handouts from last month's presentations and with the agendas and the minutes. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the November 11th, 2025 meeting. There are just a couple of minor corrections. In the copies that we received via email, in number 2, it called the meeting for October. It was actually for November. And then down in the body of that first paragraph, it also references October 21st. Should have been November 21st. So those changes have been made on the copies that are at your place. And the other correction that I have brought to their attention is that we misspelled Gary's last name. See what happens when you're not here, Gary? All right, we'll get it corrected. So if I can have a motion and a second with the changes. Got a motion by Mark, second by Gary. Thank you, Gary, for being here. Okay, next item on the agenda is an overview of street classifications, condition ratings, and the proposed eligibility and selection process for 2026 bond roadway projects. We'll turn to Bo.
Well, good evening, everyone. I just want to let everyone know that I showed this presentation to Dakota before everyone got here, and his review was, he said that it was riveting, so I hope everyone is of the same opinion when we're done.
Thank you, Dakota.
So tonight, as the chair mentioned, we're going to go through some classifications, some eligibility as part of the street list. But I did want to mention that before we progress into this into this process, I wanted to take a step back and kind of touch on some follow-up items that we spoke about before we broke last meeting. One of which you have on your desk as handouts, or in your spot as handouts, you have a major street listing as well as a residential street listing. And that is based on the conversation that we had regarding specific streets and their OCI. Now, in some conversations with Caroline, we just prior to the meeting, I think there's a chance that as we enter the next meeting, we'll provide an entire city network if that's required, or if that would be interesting to anyone. It's a very large printout, so it could be a PDF even that you could look at electronically. But for now, what we have for you as handouts are the street listings, both from a major standpoint and from a local or residential standpoint. So that way you can take a look at some of the specifics on each street: length, width, starting and end points, intersections, as well as the OCI. So I know there were some questions last meeting about some specific streets and the OCI and how that related to the mapping. So we have made sure to go through there. I think specifically, just want to touch on one that we discussed specifically was the Chapman scenario, and you'll see that those are all that there's a Chapman section on there, and it stops short of where the end section should have ended at Smithfield. So that's all been corrected, and we've gone through each of the OCIs and made sure that those match what that GIS file will show next time. And then I think we had some question on, let me get to that slide here. We had a question on kind of what is the total reconstruction cost? And we had some discussions about what is the total amount we would need today if we were to just reconstruct everything. So what I've kind of done is I've utilized the same chart that we looked at last time. So everything to the left of the purple dashed line is what this committee would be considering. And based on the 2020 bond project, so we projected no increases from today forward. However, just looking at today, looking at about a $1,630 per linear foot cost And if you multiply do all that math from 46.6 miles is what we're looking at left of that, you can see there's a $401 million street need for street reconstruction of today. So that's a very linear approach. It takes, there's a lot more information that you could go and we could get that cost down. If, when we start considering asphalt and do we replace all the concrete and kind of some different mindsets that you could look at, but from a very linear, average kind of cost, that's what we're looking at as far as a $400 million backlog on reconstruction costs today. I think the second part of that question was, what about demand capacity? If all of a sudden we looked in the bank account and there was $400 million to do that, obviously this would not be something we'd be able to handle today. We would definitely need to start looking at how those capacity or how those funds would be spent and needed to the time needed to get that actually built on the street. So don't necessarily have that information, but at least we have kind of what the total parameters would look like today. Okay, so this slide is going to look familiar, but I definitely wanted to go back over just even quickly to talk about the different evaluation factors for each street, for each classification of streets. And for this one we're looking at here, this is a major street, so those are the classifications above local. Just to make sure everyone everyone is do you have any questions about any of these? From a pavement condition, traffic volume standpoint, you're looking at around 80% of the weights and the evaluation factors they're going to be looking at. And then based on whether it's a major street or a local street, there's some secondary factors that we definitely want to pay attention to as well. But the reason why it's important to kind of understand how these are weighted and that information that is going to be used is because we're about to look at here in just a second kind of the math part of this. There's no homework, don't worry, but there is some math here that we're going to have to get into in order to understand how these are going to be ranked, which I'm hoping that at the January 6th meeting we're going to have before you some ranked data. Okay, so from a residential street, again, you're looking at pavement condition and traffic counts and volume as the primary factors and weights of the ranking system. And then we get into maintenance records. How many of the folks, or how much time are we spending on these streets from a maintenance standpoint? And then of course the public safety and network importance factors, and some pedestrian facilities in the area, and is it part of a revitalization area? And like I say, the reason all of that is important is because as we're preparing a decision matrix for everyone to see the ranked objectives that come out of it, here's why that's important in those factors, and we can back up and discuss if we need to. So you have before you the kind of the street listing here. We talked a little bit last time, or a lot about last time, OCI and how we arrived at the OCI, the overall condition rating index. So what we're going to take that listing of the OCI. You'll have those streets here, in your packet. And then what we have to do at that point, we have to put in all of those evaluation factors and weights that we just saw in the pie charts before. There's around 2,700 cells of data that we've got to look up and enter into kind of, we have it started based on preliminary conversations we had at the last meeting and kind of some experience that we've had. So we have it started. This is a very, very zoomed out wide view of one of the residential spreadsheets, but you can see there's a lot of data entry. There's a lot of data to look up, and so we want to make sure that everyone is on board with kind of how we're doing that. And there'll be some chances to take a look at that in depth once we get that ranked data and see where that line gets drawn as far as how the streets pan out. But so from this to that, or so from the top there, top left, to the bottom right, we end up at what we're utilizing or calling a decision matrix. So I want to walk everyone kind of through what this looks like on our end, and these are actual scores from kind of the top 10 or 15 on the major side. So essentially, on the far left, you have the community, or the community index rating, or, you know, what we're gonna use as the score, right? Which is basically the sum of each weight multiplied times the score, so equals the community index rating. So we're gonna go through, let me back up one slide. So each one of these cells here is gonna generate the score that you see in one of these cells, right? So it's gonna correlate. We're gonna multiply the weight, which is what you saw on the pie charts a couple slides ago. Where'd my mouse go? There we go. Times the score. And then as you move down each row, you're gonna add, there's gonna be a, you know, you're gonna sum each of these up into the community index rating, which is then going to, at the end of this, automatically rank these streets based on the community index rating, right? From there, you know, we're going to need to generate how much each of these streets are, you know, we've got to apply an estimate, we've got to generate some cost, so that way we can see the individual street construction cost as well as the you know, the sum of the construction cost. So that way we can see exactly how it is we're going to, or at what level even that we want to spend up to. So we'll be able to use that as the sum.
Well, out of curiosity,
Yes.
I guess the scale is 1 to 10 for the most of them. What is a 1 and what is a 10? Just
So each, are you talking about the scores here
Yeah.
for each one? So there's a lot of math involved in how those ranges are set up. I don't have a slide set up for that, but for each of the classifications or the scoring indexes of the evaluation factors at the top, it's a little bit different, right? So,
so like for instance, in condition rating,
Yeah.
the first column,
so
is 1 worse than an 8?
no, the heavier the higher the number, the worse the condition rating. So if you look at the worst one we have on here is probably cross timbers. If you look at cross timbers, I'm just guessing that it's one of the higher OCIs. I'm sorry, the lower OCIs on there, which then generate the higher number in the decision matrix or the score column. That makes sense. So yeah, but each of them have a different factor related to how the breakdown of the OCI. You know, so for every, you know, so many the lowest scale is obviously going to have the higher points. That way it generates the higher community index rating. Does that make, sorry, I misunderstood that
That's
question.
good. Yep.
Everyone's awful quiet. Any questions here?
Just curious, how do you come up with the network importance? Because, I mean, it's easy, you know what your volume is, that's a number, you know what your capacity is. I'm just curious, what goes into the network importance? Because, you know, someone's network importance may not be mine because I don't live over there, but
What I'd like to do is ask if Caroline could answer that question. That I think she's going to answer it better than I can.
So, and that is where, you know, as much as we try and be objective, there is a little bit of subjectivity in this too. So that network importance, you know, if we kind of go down the list here, and we can see, you know, Booth Callaway, does everyone here know where Booth Callaway is, runs next to the hospital. So these are all kind of in that collector category, but that one then has a larger network importance just because of proximity to that. It could be because Cross Timbers is also a collector, but it's way more localized up in the north part of town. But that's basically it. If it serves kind of a larger local purpose, because not every collector Not every collector is the same. And these scores, like Bo said, for each of the categories, there is a range of scores that are assigned. In some case, like in the case of condition rating, you're going to have more variability. You've got ones for the streets that have a relatively high condition rating, but you can see 7s and 8s. In other categories, you'll see where we've just got 1, 5s, and 10s as available scores. And the point of all of this is that we're trying to bring as much differentiation as we can to these scores so that we are actually achieving a ranking. So just based on the snapshot, and like Bo said at the beginning, the street lists that you have, those are all project candidates right now that we need to get this information on. That's not all the streets in the city. These are just the streets that, based on pavement condition, are worthy of consideration by the committee. But you can see, just based on this snapshot, we've got at least one category, if not two, where everybody scores the same. So, if these were the only streets to consider, we look at citizen input and complaints, which, and to be fair, they may not have that one completely finished. That's not going to help us make a decision. That's not going to help you make a decision because everybody scores the same. But if we look at all of the streets, it could be that some of those rise to that level. And that goes back to kind of one of the key questions tonight, which is the criteria at the top, condition rating, traffic volume, and so forth. Do you think that those are appropriate things to consider? Do you think there are any that we haven't thought about? Do you think there are any that we have thought about that we shouldn't be worried about? To help, at the end of the day, come up with a system that will yield a ranked list that is defensible, that is capturing the actual needs. So that's a long answer to your question.
Because it is based, some of them more subjective than others. There's a previous slide that says network report / I think public safety, and it makes sense because it's a feeder to the hospital department.
Or if it's a key response route based on, fire stations and so forth.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize if this was mentioned before, but is there a time frame when these scores are tallied, or how are these, is it a rolling time frame and when these scores come together, or who's managing like that process to get it to this snapshot?
That is Mr. Blankenship over here. So some of these, the OCIs, that's based on the condition assessment that was done in 2023, brought up to 2025, 2026 standards based on degradation if nothing has happened to them, and some other factors. So we're trying to capture that condition in as much real time as we can. And the others, they're in the process, they've already started, but they're capturing that now so that it will have that information ready in January. There's not going to be a whole lot of variability, but yeah, the intent is that we're looking at it now. We're not relying on information from 5 years ago, but by the same token, if we weren't going through this process, we aren't on an ongoing basis keeping track of all of these data points for every street. This is specific to this process. Yes, sir.
Does volume capture just actual vehicle count, or does it capture axles? Like is it distinguishing between larger vehicles versus passenger cars?
It is not doing the ESOLs or the equivalent single axle loads. It's just vehicle counts. And in the case of the major streets, we're collecting actual volume data. In the case of the locals or the residential streets, because there are so many, we're making some assumptions based on trip generation rates for typical single-family homes and the number of homes that are either on the street or are fed by the street.
I just didn't know, because some of these streets have higher commercial traffic than others, like 18-wheelers.
Sure, and I think that's where we've got the commercial presence as a factor to consider, which would kind of directly, indirectly factor that in.
I do have one question. So I'm trying to figure out how Bonzer fits in with the network importance, Bonzer Street, with the other streets. I understand Booth Callaway and understand Browning. drive, but Bonzer has a 5 on the network importance, and I'm trying to understand why that street. I understand the other streets, the need for the 5, but why Bonzer?
Why did it score a 5?
Why did Bonzer score a 5?
I would have to go back into the spreadsheet to double check that, but
Because I'm just not getting it, because it's not fitting with my mind, with Booth Callaway and with Browning.
It's a major to get to the south side of the city
I-
to take Onyx South.
I think as to the point Caroline made earlier, that collector connection to the network of local streets, that it is, I mean, if you take away Richland Plaza, that really, I mean, that is your connection to that area of those local streets, if you will.
That starts to
Okay.
make sense. I'm just, in my head, I was just putting more emphasis on the services around it. But then this one, we're talking primarily about the residential area, people trying to get out to 26 or whatever from there. Whereas in Booth Callaway, I'm thinking about getting to the hospital, and and on Browning, it's back there in the industrial area by the train station and all that. So that makes sense, now that you said that, bringing it from the residential piece.
Yeah, that's definitely how that,
226, yeah.
yeah. And I know, like I say, this is just a snapshot. These are initial returns. We've not factored everything in. As I mentioned earlier, there's quite a bit of data points here. We have to enter, find, and then and obviously verify and double check. So I'm so happy to answer any of those questions like Ms. Compton just had about some of those specific streets or any other of the factors as well. So for tonight, okay, there you go.
Is there a difference in concrete and asphalt roads? Do y'all have a difference in concrete and asphalt roads to weigh them differently based on repair price? You can get a lot more with asphalt than concrete.
So that's a great question, and I think that this committee will absolutely, that'll be one of the points that I'm hoping that gets generated based on this, because as everyone may be aware, may not be aware from the 2020 bond election, on the residential side, we went back with an asphalt rehabilitation, which is, as Mark mentioned, much cheaper than a concrete reconstruction. But as far as weighting them, all of them, I mean, residential, aside from the major side of the decision matrix, will be obviously different because the factors are different. But it doesn't necessarily take into account the surface type, if you will. It's more associated with the OCI, if you will. So, but I will tell you, looking through the list, I didn't see any concrete streets that fell into the less than 40, less than 60 kind of parameters that we're talking about here. Does that answer? Okay.
What I would do, since 50% of the index is the condition rating, just to test the sensitivity to that, I would do like another model and drop that down to 40, and then take the other 10% and allocate it evenly over the other categories, and just see what different streets get selected, and then go in and look at those and say, okay, this didn't make it when we give it a 50% rating, but does it deserve to be on the list because of these other categories?
Absolutely. So that's a great point. And as you know, I think we literally discussed how sensitive the model is and how this can impact on the, for example, on the residential side of the equation here. And I don't have that for us yet, but there's 185 streets. There's a lot of data, a lot of entry, a lot of oversight there. What would the model say how does it overcome the 80% at that point from the traffic volume? And so we were definitely talking about different ways to test the model today. So that's a good point. Any other discussion, conversation? So, that's all the new information I want to bring tonight. But I did want to talk about a couple different things moving forward and kind of getting them prepared for next week, or I'm sorry, next month, next month's meeting. We're going to have some questions, as we just alluded to. Hopefully we'll have some ranked data for everyone based on these decision matrix, and then of course you guys have the list. So if there's anything that jumps out of place, you can definitely take a look at that. And for those that were here last time, we don't have yellow orange vest. Maybe one of us does in this meeting, but we're not asking for you to take a on the ground inspection, but definitely take a look at them and understand the different OCIs maybe. I don't know if anyone had a chance to take a look at some of the different OCI streets that we talked about last week or last meeting. But also too, some questions about, are we going to go back with asphalt? Are we going to go back with concrete? There's going to be some of those analytics that we're going to provide along with the ranked data. So that way we can conclude if our 3 meetings kind of with a good plan to move forward while the committee moves forward through some different subject matter. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain about the category for public safety response and provide more information about that topic?
So on this is again on the major street factor, we're in communication with both police and fire emergency services, and so we're asking them, should this road become reconstructed, or is it part of the plan? How important is this going to be, or does this improve your response? So we're working with those folks. I'm not going to be able to tell you whether or not, that I want to make sure that they had the chance to kind of input that data. So that's why those factors are there.
And that can be as simple as, an extreme example would be Glenview, which of course now that those projects are over, but the condition prior to reconstruction was such that it compromises how quickly, those vehicles can drive. And so it's as simple as, if we reconstruct a street, is it going to, are police and fire going to be able to travel down it more easily than they were before? But when you look at that 1, 5, 10 as the differentiators, that can cause some real difference, but it's still, it's only at a 5 in terms of that weighted importance at the top. So it can help separate them, but it's not a major decider in the same way that pavement condition is.
Mr. Sleeter.
Yeah, I don't know that you can really quantify the answer to my question, and probably, I think my question really, and I'm not really looking for a quantified answer, but more of a, is it something that you could put into, I don't know how it would factor into your decision-making process, but for example, at the hard corner of Browning and Iron Horse, there's kind of an open tract of land that is slated at some point for a couple hundred more apartments. Are there any other places in North Richland Hills that have slated, planned, potentially planned large development projects which would impact volumes in the next few years? Because, whatever we do now needs to account for that, just in case we have to wait another 20 years for a bond election.
So
Your thoroughfare maps that you already have are going to designate what type of adjacent roadways that are already there in your planning process.
No, but
I just didn't know about.
Yeah, if the question is, are those streets that are going to have higher volumes in future, are those being considered if we're giving 30% weight to traffic volumes today? Because that volume doesn't exist there now, but it will. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right.
Yeah, and so how it's structured today, the answer is no, but that's something we can certainly take a look at, because it's not that common. Iron Horse is a good example of that. Smithfield is another good example of that. The future development around the rail stations is going to increase that volume, and is it worth considering? Sure.
That's the squawk that I've heard is, you know, if this list comes in, it's really going to significantly impact some roads that haven't seen that volume.
Sure. I mean, the good thing is, to Mr. Davis's point, the way the roads are classified and designed on the transportation plan, the number of lanes they're going to have, that does take that future volume into account. And so if they're selected and they have that new pavement, the pavement thickness, the cross-section of that pavement is going to take those future traffic volumes into account as far as how well it is built to sustain lots of volumes, potential commercial traffic, things like that.
So, noted, as we're putting together the rest of the ranked data here.
Just so I can understand and stop me. All right, so condition rating objective, you have that machine that goes around and feeds that data to you, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the traffic volume, you guys do traffic studies, and that's objective, and that we don't need to question that, other than the weight, I guess, right? And then the rest of those, tell me one more time who determines those, or who has determined those?
This committee, I mean, these are proposed at this point.
Okay,
but
well,
we
let's go
wanna-
with that. Who's proposing them?
He's talking about the scores.
Yeah.
That's the staff that's going in and assigning the
Yeah.
scores for each of the.
And then staff, meaning, I mean, everybody, that this list goes around to fire, police, to somebody that looks at hospital, who's looking?
At this point, city staff is, if I understand the question correctly.
And then you get input from any other, I mean, which city staff?
Well, depending on, like we talked about, the public safety response, that's going to be police and fire. We're going to need their input when it comes to that. As it pertains to, like, let's say the citizen input, I mean, that's coming out of the most recent citizen survey that was put out. So we asked them for some specific streets. Roadway capacity, I think, you know, if that is if that's something, to Mr. Sleeter's point, if it is that we're looking that we need this capacity increase, or you know, there's some scoring that goes along with that. So depending on you know, what category, I think it may impact different sections of staff: engineering, the public works, the maintenance folks, emergency services, if that makes sense. Does that help? I mean, it's not leaving the city of North Richland Hills staff, if that.
Yeah, no, that's, I was just, if I get asked, I just want
Oh,
to say,
yeah,
this was our formula, and this is how it came up. And then,
This guy?
So, yeah, that one right there, so you can see the rows of different colors there.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit of context, green is gonna be engineering, public works, kind of looking into things. Red is FD, PD, blue is parks. The orangey, the first orangey one, that is public works operations, and then the yellowy orange one, that's gonna be planning and engineering. So it's-
that's exactly what I was looking for
Yeah,
right there.
okay.
Thank you. That makes Good total cross-section sense. of data going in, and then,
Very subjective.
are you asking us to do anything other than just accept the OCI score for each street? I mean, we're not being, are we just going to accept the community index? I'm not meaning that mean, but, or, because I don't see how we're going to be able to do all that. That's a lot of work.
It's a tall task.
Yeah. Okay, only the weights to see if we want to adjust those.
Absolutely,
All
yeah.
right.
So this is the major street evaluation factors that you'll see kind of translated into the top there along the factors there. And so the weights are and factors to the left with their weights and percentages on the right in the pie chart. Does that help?
It does. I don't think we're recreating a wheel here, so is this pretty standard, the weighting that other municipalities use for their?
to be honest with you, I don't know outside of this organization, but I do know it has worked well and has been used in the past. That doesn't mean that it's absolutely cemented in place though either. That's why we definitely want to have the conversation whether, is everyone in agreement with this before because there's, like I say, there's a lot of effort going to go in over the next month in order to get all of these factors into that ranked data, so that way we can provide, 185 residential streets and 44 major streets and a ranked condition based on these factors, and factors and weights, if that makes sense. Yes, sir.
On the, like when I look at the list of major streets, you've got a lot of there's 4 different segments of cross timbers. Ultimately, like in the decision-making process, if we were to decide, yeah, cross timbers needs to be on the list, then is there a secondary question that says, well, do you do the whole thing? Like, is there some savings and efficiency in doing the whole thing?
As part of the question, that we're going to be asking for a final kind of understanding of how this matrix and decision package is going to work. They are broken down, and you can see how it looks from a geographical standpoint in the maps that were provided last time, or last meeting. And then also you can see kind of what individual segments or the sections there look like and their ratings. So at some point, the conversation will be, do we combine them? And it's not just a general question that answers that throughout the list, because if you look, I think Smithfield is the same way. I think Emerald Hills you'll see the same way, where there's different sections, but they do have different uses in some of those areas too. So that'll be a question we definitely have to answer, whether we're going to combine those segments and sections into one project and see at that point how they rank. She has.
So is it like all or nothing? So it's like, what's the alternative, I guess? So if we decide, yes, we want to make the renovations, or it's like, what's if it's not chosen, what's the alternative? Is it like, can we take a chunk of the list versus, how does that work?
I will defer that to Caroline, but because I think what I understand is, how much is allocated to each one, and I think that's kind of the committee, but Caroline, I will defer to her.
Yeah, so, going back to the very first meeting we had, and since then, we've talked about the library, we've talked about fire stations, we're talking about streets now, we're going to have future discussions, but we have limited resources. And we know, to Bo's point earlier, at over 400 million, we can't do all of these streets. So the goal here is to come up with that list so that when the finances become clear, when it's determined how much money this committee is comfortable putting out there for a bond election and how much of that goes to streets, then we'll know how far down that list we can go. That's really the goal. And there are going to be, most of the streets won't make the cut just because we know we don't have 400 million and we've got other needs besides streets. Sure, and some of these streets that we're looking at today were considered in 2020 and they didn't make it. Some of the streets that didn't make it in 2020 aren't on this list today because we were able to look at some alternative pavement treatments to improve their condition short of full reconstruction. So we are always looking to see what we can do to come up with new things, spread those dollars so that we can address the overall pavement condition of the streets throughout the city.
And we were able to bump up some streets from the last one because we got the money for the Iron Horse Drive, right? And we were able to, streets that didn't make it, we're able to later on bump up and get into it and be made.
For the decision matrix, is the length of the project weighted in that at all, and should it be part of that decision? Like, if you've got a road that's 2,000 feet long that's pretty poor condition, but one that's 300 feet that's just slightly worse, is the 300-foot section weighted essentially equally as the long section of road? Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't think today's matrix, I don't think it considers that, but it's definitely something that if you think longer streets or longer segments,
They're essentially in the same condition.
you know, maybe if you would like to see there be a weighted factor on that, then definitely, you know, it's something we could take a look at.
It does, on the residential side, the cost per car kind of factors that in, because we're looking at total project cost divided by the traffic counts, but not so much on the majors. And we're trying to walk a line between transparency and boring you to death. So, you know, the math is, I think, super interesting, and I'm glad to see people, you know, wanting to dig into it, and we're happy to, you know, share as much as you want to see.
Well, if you toggle between those weights in your Excel spreadsheet, if you were just bored and wanted to do that, and you generated something worth discussing, you know, you're like, wow, you know, it really came up with a new list, and I can see some merit in that new list, then, you know, it might be worth having that at the committee. Like, hey, we applied the weights as we presented them to you, and then we also adjusted the weights a little bit. Like I said earlier, stealing from the condition rating just because that's the largest weighting there, and applied it. If it did anything that you felt like was worth discussing, then, you know, we could give you feedback on that. But it might not. It might not change it by more than 1%. I don't know. But that's just what I've thought in looking at it. If I had that spreadsheet in front of me, what would I do? That's what I would do, is play with those, you know, and see if it did anything worthwhile.
You're right, that condition rating, strong arms and everything. Like you're at 400 on Yulee Street, when you go 8 times 50, you're at 300 on Bond Street, when you go 6 times 50, you're already, because whenever you have full max, if you were to 10 everything, you're at 1,000, right? So your max score is 1,000, your minimum score is 100. And when you're, like you're talking about it, so heavily weighted towards that condition rating, if you have a high score on that, you're always going to be at the top of the list.
But isn't that what most people look at? I mean, the condition of the road, you know, going down, how much travel and all the above.
But if you stole away from that, for instance, and it all of a sudden kicked in a street, and you looked at it on the map and said, you know what, that's a targeted development area street that wouldn't have made it otherwise. I'm not saying that you change the whole weights from what's presented here, but it might give you an idea to say, you know what, let's just go ahead and throw that street in too, on top of what we were already going to do.
Makes sense.
Because like you said earlier, we're evaluating hundreds of streets here, so.
For sure, yes, 100.
It's not like at the end of the day you say, okay, these are the correct weights to use. It's just, okay, it gave us 3 more streets that we're going to figure out a way to stick them in there.
Well, and the great thing is that it's easy to change those weights and see how that scenario plays out.
Yeah, that model can be pretty simple to change. But I would really like to pull the spreadsheet up. It sounds like you're pretty interested in it, and we could toy with it right now. But I promise you, it's as I showed you earlier, it's far from being done as far as that is completed. But we were able to get a couple streets, just really kind of getting those cleaned up for now. But and then to Caroline's point, you know, if you look at traffic volume, I mean, look at that column. All of them having 7s there means that we need to somewhat see what those separations are in the volumes that we're seeing. So that way, the higher volumes should weigh more against, or should provide more as far as the community index rating.
And it's probably, the ranges for traffic volumes here are probably carried over from the 2020 bond. When we had, there was a big difference between Columbia traffic and Chapman traffic, for instance. So there's just not as much difference here in those volumes.
Richard, to your point, I live on a street that has a 3-inch wide crack going about 100 foot. I also get 15 cars a day. So the condition rating should be high, but the traffic volume is so low that it should not make this list because there's so many other more important streets on the road. So in that condition rating, in my opinion, it would be a high score, but it shouldn't be on the list because it's not an important street.
Well, just to clarify, it should be on a list,
On the
right?
list, yeah.
But that's going to fall into, you know, the right side, not the left side of this chart, where it's, you know, there's some sort of maintenance category that it should fall into. Chris is taking note. I saw him writing a 3-inch crack down over there. So.
I wouldn't wholeheartedly disagree with this kind of statement. Yeah, no, condition is everything. I mean, I sat through some similar presentations when I lived in Euless, and don't care if there's 5 cars a day on a street. If a street has failed and you can't drive down it without blowing a tire, that condition needs to bump that street up. So I'm all in favor of keeping condition as high as it is.
Good feedback.
Any other questions?
A lot of work to do.
These are just the candidate streets.
Okay, all right,
So, but Bo had mentioned, we're looking at getting a PDF export. It's like 40 pages long of all the streets in the city.
But to specifically answer the question, we didn't want to put a street on there that is being constructed or reconstructed now that to be considered for this. It would not be a candidate.
And the bad news is, all these won't make the list. There's a need, but the capacity won't allow us to do that. That's it.
That's it.
Any questions of Bo or staff? Any further questions? What time is it? 6:48. Okay. Thank you, staff, for your excellent presentation and for being here with us today. You do an excellent job for us. All right, seeing no further questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that's public comments. An opportunity for citizens to address the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee on matters which are scheduled on this agenda for consideration by the committee, but not scheduled as a public hearing. In order to address the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee during public comments, a public meeting appearance card must be completed and presented to the recording secretary prior to the start of the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee meeting. Do you have any cards? Okay, seeing none. No further questions. Our next meeting is January the 6th, and then the following meeting after that is January 20th. I believe we'll go on to 2 meetings a month from now on. So thank you for your attendance, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.